This program is made possible in part thanks to generous donations from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to the Suzanne Atwell Show. In this edition, Sarasota Media and the state of the Fourth Estate. From Main Street to digital, from legacy conglomerates to purveyors of conspiracies and lies. As we will see, the disruptive influence of technology on media and society cannot be overstated. In medieval Europe, the commercial launch of Gutenberg's printing press in 1454 opened a floodgate of religious knowledge that contributed to the Protestant Reformation. The notion of a fourth estate evolved from the French Revolution concept that common people, equal to the two ruling classes of church and nobility, constitute a third estate. The term fourth estate appears in the late 18th century and is generally attributed to Edmund Burke, an Irish-born British member of Parliament. The American Republic application conceives a fourth estate or fourth power in addition to the executive, legislative, and judiciary branches. It refers to the press and news media's capacity to influence and hold political leaders accountable.
The general idea of informing the public, informing citizens of what their representatives are doing and keeping from them, that's a good idea.
The modern history of American media does include holding the political and powerful accountable. But it also included bias and political influence. Yellow journalism and fake news dominated late 19th and early 20th century papers. Joseph Pulitzer, the founder of the Pulitzer Prize, along with William Randolph Hearst, are credited with starting yellow journalism, a highly successful business model that embraced and advocated political partisanship. Fox News founder Roger Ailes understood this very well.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Turns out the symptoms of societal decay are universal. They're not unique to a specific society. You recognize them in any country at any time, now or 1,000 years ago. Always the same.
So, what is the point, you might ask? The point is we are at a dangerous moment in time when information has become a commodity. The point is truth becomes negotiable when conspiracy theories and lies are validated on social media, in print, and on TV. The information revolution is a modern wonder, but it is also very disruptive. To help us navigate the brave new digital world, we turn to local media leaders, starting with the esteemed Sarasota Herald-Tribune. We're talking about digital media in Sarasota. Please explain the content flow between print and digital. When a story is about to be approved, are there editorial differences between the print version or the digital version?
Occasionally there are, because digital is a breaking news medium. You know, that is something that allows us to get a news story out to the public as quickly as possible. So sometimes that story is still developing. It might be a terrible crash that shuts down the interstate. And so we're letting people know so they can avoid the area. We're letting them know what might be going on. And that's something that we often will write in present tense. You know, police are on the scene, avoid the area. This story will be updated. That wouldn't make sense to put in a print publication.
Help us understand your audience from a demographic perspective. What's the profile of a person that is visiting for the digital site as opposed to one who's subscribing to the print?
Well, I mean, I think our print and digital audiences tend to gravitate toward the same content. We know what's popular. We know that government accountability stories, growth and development, real estate, food and dining, and high school sports, for example, are popular with our audiences, whether they come to us on our website or whether they subscribe to the print edition.
Technology has been obviously very disruptive in traditional media, but it's also been very liberating in the number of voices that in the marketplace that's gaining. You spent 30 years with the Tampa Bay Times as an editor and a journalist. What got better? What got worse?
That's an interesting question. I think a lot got better. When I started my career in 1988 as a reporter, we published once a day. And so we often worked all day long on a story, or sometimes all week long on a story, and we'd publish it, and it would come out the next morning. And it didn't matter what happened after that, if significant development happened, if officials reacted to our story, we didn't get to tell people about it again until 24 hours later. In terms of what's worse, I would have to say it's the business foundations for newspaper journalism. Long ago, it used to be that advertising gave us pretty generous financial support for covering the news. Advertisers wanted to reach our audience. We often had very dominant reach in an audience in a community, and they paid a lot of money to be part of the newspaper and reach that audience, and that funded a lot of journalists and a lot of journalism. And as the internet has evolved and as advertisers have shifted to the internet, that funding has drastically decreased. And that's why you've seen the erosion in the size of staffs of local newspapers, the closing of some local newspapers, because even though we operate online and we sell digital advertising, the money is so much less than the print advertising of yesterday that it just doesn't support the same amount of journalism spending.
Well, and to that point, Gannett's the largest newspaper publishing group in the country. Some say media consolidation is the death knell to localism, but scale has led to a lot of collaborative, investigative work. Could you give us an example of how the Sarasota Herald-Tribune, some stories reflect that?
One example of that is how Gannett's newspapers in Florida work together as a unified network. So we have 18 daily papers in Florida, and I oversee all of those newspapers. They each have terrific editors in place who are working for their local community. And we work together. We have a statewide team that's covering the governor's race and important stories in Tallahassee that matter to all of our readers and provide those stories to all of the newspapers and news sites across the state. We collaborate on journalism that affects us all as Floridians. For example, we recently have done a three-part series. We're working on part 3 right now on the effect of Amazon in Florida, looking at all the land it was buying, looking at the effect on the labor market. We're now looking at its effect on the political landscape. And that has pulled together journalists from Sarasota, from Daytona Beach, from Palm Beach, from all over to work together on a story that affects the entire state. And then we've given it to all the readers in the state.
And to some of the points you made on business, Pointer reports that 54 Gannett papers had layoffs in the wake of the second quarter of 2022. Can you tell us what happened in Sarasota, Florida?
We did not have layoffs in Sarasota. We are a growing market in terms of building our digital subscriptions, and that's a key goal of ours and of Gannett, because that's what's going to carry us into the future, is making sure that people are able to find our journalism online, and our growth has been very strong in that area.
Finally, a big J paradox, the democratization of media and, ironically, the decline of democracy. The liberation of information via social media and the rise of informational anarchy. So, my question is about editorial moderation. What is the difference between Facebook and Gannett, other than the fact that Facebook's market capitalization is greater than the entire newspaper publishing industry?
Yes, they have a lot more money than we do. But I think there are some big differences. And I say that without necessarily taking a stand that, oh, social media is evil. You know, I do think it has connected society in many ways, but I think we've also seen the pitfalls. And so people will understand. I mean, we have a staff of journalists, whether they are new in their careers or veterans of 20, 30, and sometimes 40 years, who work together and have an editorial process to try to make sure that what we are publishing is factual, fair, accurate information. You know, in the social media world, anyone can publish anything, although some social media platforms have tried to crack down on misinformation, but they don't have that process. They can say what they want, and in many cases, what they say isn't true, I think.
Well, and is truth negotiable?
I don't think so. I mean, I think facts are not negotiable. I mean, I think facts are facts, and we work very hard to make sure that we are presenting vetted, accurate facts. Now, certainly, different people have different opinions about those facts. They may interpret them differently. They may feel that this may be true, but here's what that means for you and me, and someone else thinks it means something very different. And we try to share those viewpoints and explore them. But I don't think facts are negotiable.
I could not agree more, Jennifer. Facts are not negotiable, but they are not always clear either. To help us understand the evolution of family-run papers and television and the economic forces driving consolidation, we turn to the top guy at our top local television station. When you started at WWSB, it was owned by the Calkins family, a third-generation newspaper and small broadcast group. Today, you're part of Gray Television, a mega media company that owns 180 stations, I believe. How has your job changed? What's going on with that now?
Oh, interesting. It's been night and day as far as we went from a smaller group of 3 TV stations, and they also owned 8 newspapers. Very, very driven and deeply rooted in the communities.
One of the most profound changes, as we all know, has been digital technology.
Sure.
ABC7 was one of the first local stations in the country to provide a full linear program schedule via an app. Tell our viewers what that means in terms how they're able to watch local programs like the news with this format.
Yeah, well, that came out of I'd like to say it came out of innovation, but it came more out of a need, which turned into innovation. So a number of years back, again, one of the other challenges that we faced was competition. Yeah. So we covered heavily the Charlotte County area, which is a different market for us. And you cannot have 2 ABC affiliations licensed in the same DMA except for the requirements we have in this market. So we ended up getting taken off of those systems down there, which required us to scramble and say, how can we, and we had a number of calls from our viewers saying that we can no longer get you on our systems. This is going back to 2014, 2015, when, the Fire TV, the Roku TV, Apple TV were still in early development. We didn't have the technical expertise, so our digital team had to utilize outside developers to help us get there and get there quick.
From a business perspective, can you give us a ballpark figure on what % of sales revenue comes from digital?
Yeah, roughly right now about 18%. I would gather in the next 3 to 5 years that will get closer to 50% of our revenues.
That'll all happen, you think, within 5 years?
Yeah, within 5 years, very easily. If you think about it, people refer to the TV station as a broadcaster. That's not our business. Our business is content. So all broadcast, our transmitter it's all that is a delivery platform. So whether it's on your regular TV setup over the air, or through cable, through satellite, but mostly folks, the younger folks are consuming us here.
Right.
And we need to be anywhere that you want to
Absolutely.
consume us.
And to that point on content and editorial workflow, from the time a story is assigned to the time that it's ready, is there a difference between the review and approval process, digital and television?
No. With the exception of we break it on the web, we break it digitally. But that's the key, is making sure that we don't hold. In the past, it used to be hold the content, whether you were television or print. Hold the content, don't give it away. That has flipped. No, we're going to break it on the web. Tease it on social media, and then give you the facts on television. Now that we yield a huge amount of responsibility. And I have the conversation I have with my team quite often, especially we get a lot of folks that are second, third job in the careers, that we will err on holding the story, unlike in the 70s and 80s, where it's break it, be the first. We won't be the first. We'll be the first to get it right.
So explain to our viewers the difference between moderated content on social media and comment distributed by a common carrier.
Yeah, well, that has been especially very polarizing, especially since 2020. In what method? So common carrier, if you think, we also refer to it as net neutrality. Basically, from a common carrier perspective, is that regardless of platform, anybody can access or feel free to discuss what they want on any platform and share their thoughts without any interference. You'll see it with Parler. You'll see it with Twitter when Donald Trump was taken down because that was moderated content.
Finally, ABC7 differentiates itself as being your local station now. At the end of the day, what keeps you up at night in terms of Sarasota being a good watchdog, being a good neighbor?
When we talk about community service, the community, what differentiates us, we're in there's 10 counties in our market, in the Tampa market.
Okay.
We service 2.
Okay.
We don't try to be Tampa.
No.
We'll cover the big stories in Tampa for the elections, but we don't try. They come down in our backyard, but we don't go into we don't go up there. The more they come down here and cover news from outside the metro,
Right.
the more they're pulling viewers away from that.
Thank you, Jeff, for taking time for us. One of the great things about our community is we still do have family-owned media, perhaps none better known than the Observer Group. You know, you have an interesting job. On your website, you say you're a fourth-generation newspaper girl, but it's digital that gets you going. What's that all about?
So yes, I am a fourth generation newspaper girl, so ink runs through my veins. Digital excites me because that's the future of the media business. And innovate and elevate is our vision statement at the Observer Media Group. And in the digital space is where we really have the freedom to innovate and try new things. But I do have to say, print is still our core business, and where we live here in Sarasota and in Florida, the demographics are still great for print, so I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Right, back to that, much is said about the decline of local news coverage, the consolidation of what used to be family-owned print, radio, and TV. And you just mentioned the Observer family's vision. You said that well. Let's talk about the online audience.
So it's interesting. The demographics of our online audience is exactly the same as it is in print. So our online audience, the age is 45 to 65 plus, which is the same demographic as our print products. And our online visitors, we get about 250,000 unique visitors to our website, yourobserver.com, every month. It's our largest audience. And it continues to grow. In fact, our digital editor just gave me these stats yesterday that our brand lovers, who are people who visit our site 15 times or more a month, has gone up 22% in the last year.
Okay, question. What's the difference between news and marketing? Sometimes it's hard to tell. Often it seems like there are more real estate or restaurant than news. What's going on with that?
So there's something called sponsored content. That is marketing. In the old days, it used to be called advertorials.
When a story is ready and it goes to print, digital, what is the approval process? How does that work?
So online is where we break stories. It's the news, what happened, when it happened, where it happened, the who, what, when, where, why. That breaks online. In print, we'll take those stories and say what this means to you, or how does this thing that happened affect you in your community and in your neighborhoods. So it's a little bit different strategies. Now, our reporters do everything now. There's not print reporters, there's not online reporters, there's not a photography department. They do it all. They write their stories, they take the photos, they post them online, they post them on social media, so they have to do it all. Now, all of those stories do go through an editor who reads the stories first and make sure all the facts are correct, and then shoots it back to the reporter, and then they post it online.
Finally, the country is going through a difficult time. Many people believe that the non-moderated content on social media sites like Facebook contribute to the problem. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree. There are ways to fact check what you're reading, but I absolutely think that it's skewing people's perspectives and getting the wrong information out there, which is why I think it's so important that people still trust their local media, newspapers, TV, radio, because it's our job. We're held accountable and liable if we print incorrect information. Whereas social media and Google are actually protected by law, that they're not held accountable for it. So that to me is, I think, a little bit unfair. And actually there's a law right now being formed called the Journalism Conservation and Protection Act that's actually fighting against to make sure that Facebook and Google should be held accountable for what they publish, just like news operations are.
Emily makes a very good point about fact-checking and making the effort to weed out the facts from the spin. To continue that effort, we turn to Rick Edmonds from the Poynter Institute. Thanks for joining us, Rick. There are many types of digital media. Give us an overview of the market.
Well, for starters, I think the so-called legacy media, that would be newspapers like the Herald Tribune, local TV stations, do have a digital presence. A lot of them are trying to move as quickly as possible to digital first and getting paid digital subscribers. So that's sort of one bucket. Then, as you suggest, there are new kind of franchised fill in the blanks. I guess that's not a nice way to say it, but formatted local news operations. Axios Local is an example of that. They typically have fairly small staff. They rely a lot on aggregating stories from various sources, like the two I just mentioned, TV stations and the newspaper, do a little bit of reporting themselves. And then I think the third category is small digital startups, and there are many of those. I suppose I ought also to mention, though I'm not familiar with them, that there's a certain amount of really disreputable stuff online, and sometimes ideology or disinformation masking as a local news source. So as a consumer, you want to kind of be wary that you're not spending a lot of time with those.
Well, and to that point, social media has liberated and fragmented control of the news and information from a few elite providers. It's also diluted public recognition of the truth. Explain what moderation means and the difference between having editorial responsibility and being a common carrier.
Well, that's a great question, and one that I've thought about a lot. And let's talk about Facebook, because that's the most the biggest and the most egregious case. So on the one hand, I think as Mark Zuckerberg conceived Facebook, it was as a common carrier with the twist that it united numbers of people. You could interact with friends from long ago or special groups that were formed, wildly popular, obviously, and international in scope. But the kind of hitch in that is that, like it or not, it's also a publisher, and the content on there is out for everybody, and sort of the ways of pushing people to that content are varied, and the content can be can be untrue, can be otherwise objectionable. And so he's kind of been stuck with trying to moderate, that is, to decide which things need to basically be tossed off the platform. And with the volume he has, I mean, that's an enormous task. One analogy I've used is if I call you up on the phone and make horrible threats, I've done something wrong, I'm liable, but no, the phone company isn't. So that's kind of the common carrier principle. But as I say, once you really sort of ventured into publishing, and you think about it, what's there is for anybody who finds it to see. It's a much more difficult situation.
Help us become educated digital content consumers.
Well, I'd say two things about that. Probably first, I ought to mention my colleagues at Poynter. We have three large fact-checking and information education sort of subunits within Poynter. PolitiFact, which has been around for 15 years now. We have an international fact-checking organization, and we have something called MediaWise that originally started to try to educate teenagers on how to be wary news consumers. And they're easy to teach because you can give them a few tricks to recognize a phony video, and they pick that up right away. I think for those of us who are older, it's tougher, but to the extent you can find out by looking at the source what it is. Does it have people behind it? Is it at least somewhat clear what its guiding purposes are? That's a start at determining what's information, what's disinformation.
Let's talk media business. Explain the economic forces behind the sale of individual family-owned properties to large corporate groups.
Consolidation, for better or for worse, is a fact of life. Capital has flowed into consolidating, bringing various papers together, and you do end up with very large companies with large collections of papers. Sarasota, case in point, that it's been through, went from family ownership to the New York Times to Halifax to Gatehouse to Gannett. So that's quite a few.
Finally, Rick, there's a lot of talk about the decline of American democracy and the role of media. Please share your thoughts on the value of providing different sides to a story.
I do think, particularly if we're looking nationally, there's, and this has been written about a lot, there are ways that, pretty easy ways for people to select the media that confirm what they already think. So people sorted themselves out along those lines. And then, again, a little bit more sinister thing is that there are stations, networks, OAN, Newsmax, et cetera, that traffic in misinformation and conspiracy theories. I think probably most of us noticed the trial of Alex Jones, where he finally got nailed for denying that Sandy Hook ever happened. Your choice of stories, your choice of sources, the way you frame evidence and conclusion, each of those steps involves a judgment call about is this true, is this accurate, is it in context?
Context and history are the waypoints to finding and recognizing the facts. We are fortunate that Sarasota has a diverse local media market. Large national corporations, family-run operations, and dozens of small digital enterprises like Axios and Patch. But we also have purveyors of big lies, local Proud Boys on social media, dangerous QAnon conspiracy theorists, and divisive groups like Moms for Liberty. We have the resources necessary to make informed decisions. The question is, will we use them? For more information about media and digital platforms, check out these links, especially fact-checking sites like PolitiFact. And you can always watch this episode and all our previous episodes on my website and YouTube channel. Well, that wraps up another one. Hope you learned something and enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching. Please share us with your friends. And until next time, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and I'll see you around town.
If you would like to support local public service programming like this, please visit our website, suzanneatwell.org, to make a tax-deductible donation. Thank you for watching.